Good morning. The reading is a familiar to us all, the parable of the lost son, and I'm reading from Luke chapter 15, verse 11 onwards. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided the property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and then squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called to one of his servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he was seen him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, come home, you killed the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'"
Thanks, Joe. Charlie, would you like to come? Remove the floor. Come and have a seat, Charlie. So when we talk, Charlie, we've got to remember to hold this up close enough that if it's down here, it's no good. We've got to hold it up here. So Charlie, your song, Amazing Grace, it's a really special song for you, isn't it? Why is it special?
I got married in July 1979 at St Andrew's Church, Lammas, Buxton, and stood in front of the church with my wife. We sang this.
That's lovely. Is there a particular line or a verse that is special to you?
No, it's the whole song. It inspires me and taught me a new life in Jesus. Remind me of really how low my friends invited me to church, so I went and never looked back. And how God has brought me to this church family here, and how works bring the best of us. I have been through some tough times, especially when I lost my wife, but God let me go this song reminds me of me and who God is and is with me.
Thanks, Charlie. Shall we give Charlie a round of applause? Charlie. If you didn't catch everything that Charlie said, he's got it written down, I've got it written down. If you want to have a read, it's there, or just speak to Charlie at the end. But we close our current series looking at our favourite worship songs with probably the best known and most classically loved hymn of all time. It's a hymn that everyone knows, every single person knows. Go and knock on the door of someone across the road and ask them to sing a bit of Amazing Grace this morning, and I guarantee that 9 times out of 10 they will be able to do it. Whether they'd want to do it is a different matter. You might find yourself explaining to a policeman why you're battering their door asking them to sing hymns. But it is such a well-known and well-loved hymn that reaches across and through all of the generations. I remember taking a group of teenagers to a Christian youth camp, and it must have been, 15 years or so ago now. And we were in the main big top tent. Thousands of teenagers. And there was this massive thunderstorm going on outside. And then all of a sudden, the power just blew out. And the generators kicked in, you know, the emergency lighting and stuff like that. But there was no microphones, no big speakers, no amps, no band, no projector for the words, just dim emergency lighting. And someone just started singing. Oh, I'm going all tingly thinking about it. Someone just started singing Amazing Grace. And before you knew it, the whole tent, thousands of teenagers, completely unaccompanied, singing in beautiful harmony, Amazing Grace. Because everyone knew the words. We didn't need them projected. As somebody sang the first line of the next hymn, of the next verse, we all knew the rest of it, you know. And who cares if we sang a couple of them out of order? We sang all the right. How does it go? We sang all the right words, but not necessarily in the right order. But it was one of the most incredible moments. You know, when I look back on that, I'm all tingly thinking about it now, and the presence of God in that tent was like a physical weight. As everything was stripped back and these teenagers just started praising God from their heart. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Just incredible. So thank you, Charlie, for choosing one of my favourite hymns too. But a bit of background to the song. The song was first published in 1779 as a poem. It had been written by John Newton a few years earlier. And John Newton is an interesting character. He was born in 1725 in Wapping in London. He was raised with no particular religious convictions, and as a young boy, he was pressed into service in the Royal Navy. Now, John Newton had a bit of a reputation. Because you know all sailors are famed for their swearing. You know, we even say, don't we, you know, that they swear like a sailor or swear like a navvy. But so strong was John Newton's profanity that he would get told off for the strength of word that he used. And he's even been known to invent some more words to even sink even lower. And he even got in trouble with other sailors for doing that and locked up for doing it. So, you know, this is who he was. And then when his time in the Navy was up, he became involved in the Atlantic slave trade, buying and selling human beings. It was in 1748 that the boat he was on was caught in a storm of such magnitude that John feared that he was about to die. And he cried out to God for mercy. And he recalls that moment as the moment of his salvation. He said he just couldn't get those words out of his head. God, if I am worthy, then have mercy. And he said he couldn't get that words out of his head, and he recalls that moment of his salvation when he realized his need for God, and he cried out and God saved him. But even though he was saved then, it was another 7 or 8 years before he gave up his life on the sea and began studying theology. But ultimately, John Newton became one of the leading voices in the abolitionist movement, fighting to abolish the buying and selling of human beings, and he gave his whole life to that cause. I will say, if you get the chance to read a biography about John Newton, it really is worth it. I mean, his conversion, when you read it, was as spectacular as that of St. Paul, and his journey from atheist to Christian and from slave trader to abolitionist is really a testament to the grace and the mercy and the salvation of our God. And it's this incredible conversion that Newton references in the song. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And the whole song is an incredible hymn about the grace and the mercy of God to love and welcome, forgive and transform even the worst of sinners. And so as I was preparing this week, it was those words at the end of the passage. You know, we have to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And those words just echo the line in the hymn, don't they? I once was lost, but now I'm found. And if there's a better passage in our Bibles that illustrates the all-encompassing love and grace of God, I don't think I know what it is. So let's have a look at the passage. So the first thing we have to note is that this is a story. It's a parable that Jesus is telling. It's a story that he told to make and illustrate a point. So if we take a look at the beginning of the chapter, if we sort of skip back a few verses and look at the beginning of the chapter, we see that the Pharisees and the religious leaders have been having a go at Jesus. They're not happy because he's spending time with the wrong sorts of people. And he's going to the wrong sorts of places. He's spending time with tax collectors, prostitutes, sinners, basically people who aren't welcome. They're not welcome in polite society. They're not welcome at the temple. They're not welcome in the public gatherings. They're not welcome at the places of worship. And Jesus, in response to all of this criticism from the religious leaders, he tells this story of a father with his 2 sons. And one day along comes the younger son and he says, I want out. I want out, and I want out now. I'm not prepared to wait for you to die till I get my inheritance. I want it now. Kind of inheritance law at the time was a bit different to what it is now. Inheritance law says that when the father dies, the land will be split. No mention of the mother. But when the father dies, the land will be split, with 2/3 going to the older son, and then 1/3 being split between any remaining children. That's how it worked. And in this case, there was only one other son, so this son would have been expecting a 1/3 share of everything. But that would be a long time into the future when the father dies. But the youngest son comes along and he says to the father, I'm not prepared to wait for you to die. Give me my inheritance now. Give it to me now. I don't think we realise how disgraceful this behaviour was in that community. This would have been shaming to the father, shaming to the whole family. It's like he's saying to the father, you are dead to me. Our relationship is ended. I want my inheritance now. But then, even more shameful than all of that, the younger son, he sold his 1/3 of the farm out from underneath them and he left with the money. But even here, notice the father's reaction in the passage. He does as the son asks. But he doesn't just give the younger son his inheritance. He divides his property between his sons. Do you see that in the passage? Did you notice that? He keeps nothing for himself. He gives the older son his 2/3 and the younger son his 1/3. Both sons receive their inheritance. And I have to say, I've missed that when I've read it before. And it is hugely significant. Well, we all know what happened next. The money was wasted. The younger son's inheritance gone, wasted, frittered away with nothing to show for it. And as the money ran out, so did the so-called friends, so did the women, so did the good times. And it seemed that the money ran out at the same time that there was a food shortage. And a famine came across the area, and as the poor young man's money went down, the prices went up. Crumbs, it could have been written today, couldn't it? And the youngest son found himself homeless. Actually, he found himself worse than homeless. He was worse than homeless because he had to get a job working with pigs. Now, pigs were considered the most unclean animals. This would have been the worst, the most disgusting, degrading, and appalling job for a Jewish man. So you have to understand how low this young man had got. But the son was so desperate, he was prepared to do anything. And at times, it says he was so hungry that he even resorted to eating the food that was only fit for the pigs. I do wonder sometimes if we've become so familiar with this story that we listen to it now and we kind of romanticize it a bit. We go, "Ah, poor boy." But just think for a moment, if that was a member of your family who had been deeply insulted in this way, or imagine it had been you who had been so terribly insulted. I wish you were dead. Give me my money now. I mean, wouldn't you be thinking that, reading this young man, he's just getting his comeuppance, isn't he? He's getting his comeuppance. What do we say? What goes around comes around, and all of that. There's a wonderful German word, isn't there, called Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude. It's a wonderful word, and it means pleasure derived from someone else's misfortune. Do I dare admit that I have at times been guilty of Schadenfreude, particularly when it's been someone who has deeply hurt or deeply insulted me. They're getting their comeuppance. And you can almost sense the religious leaders in the crowd as Jesus is talking, as he's telling this story, thinking exactly the same thing. This young man has behaved badly. He's now getting his comeuppance. It's his own fault. It's no more than he deserves. And if Jesus had ended the story there, they would have been justified in that thinking, wouldn't they? If he'd ended the story there. See what happens when you step out of God's purposes. See what happens when you step out away from the law. You will get your comeuppance. The problem is, Jesus isn't finished. And the story, the parable continues. One day, it says, one day the young man came to his senses, and it's like the reality of his situation hit him in the face like a brick. And so he decides to take his pride in both hands and go back to his father and beg forgiveness. Now, what we need to understand, I've kind of sort of said it a bit, but according to Jewish law, because of his behavior, he's received in his inheritance, he's received everything. Because of his behavior, he is no longer a son. He is dead to his father. He is no longer part of the family. But he realizes he might not be able to be a son, but at least he can be a hired hand working on his father's farm with the rest of the staff. At least then he'll be able to afford to eat and not have to look after the pigs. So he gathers up his courage and he starts on his way back. And again, we know what happens next because we've read the story. We know the ending. But the young man would have had no way of knowing what kind of greeting would be waiting for him when he got back. He just knew that no matter how awful his father's anger and rage, it could be no worse than his current situation. So the young man figures he's got nothing to lose. What could possibly be worse than this? And then we get to some of the most wonderful, some of the most amazing words that are recorded anywhere. While he is still far off, his father sees him. Older translations tell us that he girds his loins. Now, for those of you that don't know, you know the men of the day, they wore sort of long robes and sandals and a belt around the waist. So it was, think long nighty, okay? So, you know, really not conducive to moving very well, but good for when being in such a hot climate. So to gird your loins is to reach down, to grab the back hem, pull it up, and tuck it into your belt. So you turn it into sort of a pair of shorts, really. And it means that you can move freely. And you're unhindered and you're not going to fall over your hem. And this is what the father does. And then he runs. He runs to his son. Church, I don't know how to explain this to you, but Jewish elders do not run. This is shameful. It's degrading. It's demeaning. The father is bringing shame on himself through his actions, but he doesn't care. He just wants to get to his son, to welcome his son, to embrace his son. And I don't know if you noticed, but the son, he doesn't even have time to say his ready practiced, his pre-prepared speech before his father's putting a cloak around his shoulders and a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And he's calling for a celebration feast. It's a wonderful story, isn't it? And as I hear it and I imagine myself in that room with Jesus talking to all of the people gathered there, the religious leaders, the sinners and the tax collectors, I can almost imagine the sinners and the prostitutes gathered around hearing these words, hearing that invitation. You have made bad choices. You have got lost. You have found yourself living a life that you never imagined. But the Father is waiting for you. He's searching for you. He's scanning the horizon for you, waiting to welcome you back with open arms. And maybe as you sit here this morning, you identify with that younger son. You know you're not a bad person. But you've made some bad choices and you've messed up and it's all gone wrong. And it feels like it's just one mishap after another and another and another. And you wonder how on earth the Father could ever love you and welcome you and throw his arms around you again. But this morning, church, I want you to know that he's waiting. He's searching for you. His heart yearns for you. And I know so many of you long to feel his arms around you again, to know the safety and the love and the welcome of the Father's embrace. But maybe you've convinced yourself that you'll not be welcome. Please believe me. There is a cloak and a ring waiting for you, precious child of God, if you will just come home. God's grace is here for you. The thing is, Jesus isn't finished there. A lot of people, when they preach this passage, they finish there and it ends there. But Jesus doesn't end there. The story goes on. And we get that ugly scene, don't we, with the elder brother. Because the older brother, he hears what's going on and he refuses to come to the party. And you know what? I get it. I get it. Because the older brother, he's done nothing wrong. ever. He's stayed at home. He's done everything right. He's behaved well. He's kept all the rules. And now the younger, shameful, wasteful son is back. The one who's done all these awful things. And the older son, you know, he probably would have heard his father crying at night. And now that boy is back. And you know what? He's probably going to do it all over again. So the older brother, he says, I'm having none of it. I'm having none of it. And so the father shames himself again in the eyes of the community by going out to his eldest son to plead with him to come in. I mean, we read this bit, and it doesn't seem like anything much to us today, does it? But in that culture, you know, by refusing his father's request, by willfully and openly disobeying the instructions of the father, the request of the father, the elder son is now bringing shame and embarrassment to the father. But the father loves his son, and so he goes out to him. And I wonder when the religious leaders began to realize that Jesus was now talking about them, that they are the older son, the one who has been faithful and loyal and kept the rules and worked diligently day and night. And yet, they too have a completely wrong attitude. Jesus says God's grace is there for them too, the invitation to come in and live in all the fullness that God has for them. Because remember, the inheritance has already been divided up. The father kept nothing for himself. All that he has is theirs too. So when the elder son's there going, you never even gave me a little goat, everything was already his. He just wasn't living in the fullness of that. And so we have this clash, don't we? This lavish party thrown for the wayward son. The sinners and the tax collectors welcomed home. And the elder son, who is loved and precious to the father. Did you know that Israel is often called God's firstborn son in the Bible? And so the religious leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees, they also are so dearly loved by God. And they're also invited to the party. The question is, will they come? And that's the question for all of us this morning. Will we come? Have we managed to get the picture on screen? I realised this morning that I hadn't sent it through. You can't see it so well, but it's a picture of the prodigal son painted by Rembrandt. And I have to say, I love this picture. It's one that I look at and reflect on often. And there are different people in the picture there. We can see the son, the younger son. The younger son is there, he's messy, he's lost a shoe, filthy, he would absolutely stink. But the father is embracing him, not turning away, but fully embracing him and welcoming him home. There are times when we all feel like the younger son, when we know that we've messed up, when we've sinned against God, when we've wandered away, when we've turned our back and got lost. The Father is waiting today for you to turn around. He's waiting to throw his arms around you, to welcome you back home, to throw a party for you, whether that's for the first time or the millionth time. He wants to wrap a cloak around you and put a ring on your finger, the family crest that identifies you as a child of God. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. But there, look up in the corner, looking over the back, just not quite in the room, looking from a distance in the shadows. It's the older brother. And you know what? Sometimes, actually, I'm more like the older brother. Sometimes I'm the one thinking, hold on a minute, God. But they've done this and they've done that, and you're welcoming them back again. And you know the chances are that they're going to mess up again and again and again and again. And we can all be judgmental at times. seeing some as deserving of grace and others not. Praise God that he is God and I am not, and the grace of God is for everyone, for every single person. And so whether we identify this morning more with the wayward younger son, or whether we identify more with the older brother who's kept all the rules and done everything right, whoever we are, the grace of God is for you. This brother of yours was dead, but now he is alive again. He was lost, but now he is found. Thank you, God, for your amazing grace. We're going to sing again now a wonderful song that says, your love is amazing, steady and unchanging. And it's just a fabulous song, but at the end of the song, we're going to say the words of the grace to one another, and I'm going to invite you, if you want to go out to the back for refreshments. But once we've finished, we're going to put this picture back up on the screen. And if you want this morning to receive a touch from God, if you want to be filled again with his grace, if you are like that younger son that just needs to come home, then God's waiting. If you're like the older son and you've found your heart getting hard and saying, for goodness sake, God, I've never done anything wrong. What about me? Then God's grace is here for you too this morning. Come and receive. So we're going to sing, Your Love is Amazing.